Hello, everyone. My name is Misti Gaither, and welcome to Quest, a journey into true crime and the paranormal. Tonight, I am so excited to have with me another Misty Bastian, and she is an anthropologist, an author, and is really like an amazing person. And I've been so excited to get to talk to her. So, how you doing?
I'm fine. How are you, Misty?
I'm doing
It's
pretty.
really weird. I don't usually get to say, "How are you, Misty," to anybody else.
I am fine, Misty. Good, So yeah, same thing. So yeah, we'll be doing that all night. So you are recently retired as a professor of anthropology.
That's right. I was a professor of anthropology for almost 30 years at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
I'm sure some of you may be wondering, now why do you have a professor of anthropology on your true crime and paranormal show, right? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because not only is, you're an educator, like I said, and an author, but you also have an interest in the paranormal. Your area of specialty was religion, and what is that, popular culture and the paranormal.
Although I started out my anthropological career studying in West Africa. So I was doing religion, gender studies, and stuff on popular culture and popular media in Nigeria. That's where I began my research.
I've never been to Nigeria. How long were you in Nigeria?
I did my first field work for about 15 months in 1987, 1988. I went back again later in the 90s. And I also, did a lot of archival research in Britain because they had been colonized, of course, by the British. So I've done a lot of archival research all around the UK as well in terms of my African experience. But the paranormal research material came later in my career. And I got interested in ghost hunting and ghost hunters, as I at that time thought I would call them, not paranormal researchers, which I would call them now. And I decided I would do a project a little closer to home in Pennsylvania. And I ended up actually working all around the Mid Atlantic with paranormal researchers.
I really liked what a wise man said to you one time when you were talking about the paranormal. And he said, well, you're the anthropologist. Why don't you find out?
Of course, not just paranormal researchers said that to me. A lot of people seem to think the anthropologist can just find out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a larger process than that. We have to ask a lot of questions of a lot of people, and we have to listen really hard to what people have to say to us before we can make any conclusions about what's quote unquote actually going on. But I got interested in paranormal research because I just was curious. That was back in the day of sort of paranormal TV when you used to see lots of things ghost hunters were on and stuff like that. I thought, are there ghost hunters around, around where I live in Pennsylvania? So I got online and I discovered, yes, there were lots of people who were doing paranormal research in and around central Pennsylvania. And I just started contacting people and talking to them, and then going out with them on their explorations. I spent about 8 years really talking to a whole lot of paranormal researchers, not just in Pennsylvania, but also in Maryland and in New Jersey.
Now, like you said, I know there's a lot of paranormal researchers and investigators in your area. I had several on my show. There's several that that has their own shows on TV, and so I don't know if it's what is that, the Bridgewater Triangle, or what's going on up there. A lot of spooky stuff going up in the north.
We're kind of in between. Where I live is in between, say, Gettysburg and Philadelphia. So if you think about all the stuff going on in the Philly region, and then you think about all the stuff going on in Gettysburg, I'm like right in the center of that. And Lancaster and York also, which is around the area where I live, they also have a lot of researchers and people, in fact, who've been doing research, like, Rick Fisher, who's been doing research since the old analog days. He's been doing research since the 1960s. So there are people here who have been involved in paranormal research for decades and decades, half a century.
Are you still under the opinion that you may not really believe in ghosts, but yet you believe experience things that maybe you can't explain when you're doing your research and when you're out in the field doing some investigations?
The first thing I always like to tell everyone is that I don't like deal in belief.
Okay.
Belief isn't my particular interest. I'm interested in experience and what people experience, because I think that there's a reality in experience that doesn't have anything to do with what you believe or don't believe. What you believe or don't believe can't really quantify that very well. You can't kind of figure that out. That's just what you believe or don't believe. But what you experience, people have, shall we say, evidence to back that up. And I have experienced things in the field with my friends who are paranormal researchers that I didn't expect to experience. Did that make me believe in ghosts? Not exactly, but it didn't make me disbelieve in them either.
Do you mind me asking, like, maybe what happened?
It's kind of interesting. I talk about it as being a paranormal frame. Once you're in the paranormal frame, then you start seeing what you experience differently than when you're not in it. The very first night that I went out to do investigation with some local paranormal researchers, we went out. It was fabulous, actually. We went out to an iron mine, an 18th and 19th century iron mine
Wow.
in York County. It looks more like a cave than it does like a mine. And we were basically camping out around this cave all night. And when we were inside the mine, we set up all the equipment. Everyone had their equipment. Everyone was around. And I was very much being the anthropologist. I'm like, taking notes. Oh, this is where they put the camera. This is how they check the ambient temperature. I'm taking all these notes. And they sort of stuck an EMF meter in my hand and said, "Here, you hold this." And I'm like, okay. So I'm just standing there and I'm expecting to sort of record what is happening with everyone else. There's a psychic medium with us, and I was expecting that she would have, some kind of experience, and I would record what she experienced. And we're standing around, and they're like, if you are here, you can come in and touch us, or you can come near us, or whatever. To my astonishment, I'm the one that got touched.
Oh.
I'm just standing there, like with my EMF meter. What? And I feel this cool, like, touch on my hand, and it just keeps sort of caressing my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I remembered what our leader had told us, which is, if you feel something, you should speak about it. So I thought, okay, well, am I in? Am I really in, or am I not? And I thought, well, I'm in. So I told everyone, well, something is touching me. And immediately I had this really interesting experience of every piece of equipment and all the attention of everyone in the group immediately focused on me, including that of the medium. And the medium, felt that it was a small child who was for some reason attracted to me, who then, kind of held my hand. I can't really describe it except to feel like there was something cool holding my hand. And the air around my hand was found to be cooler than the rest of the place. And people asked questions, and of course there were, people were doing EVP sessions and things like that. And I'm just standing there, basically, according to my friends, holding a ghost's hand throughout the entire experience, until the child, ghost, creature, coolness left. And when it left, it just left. And that was the very first night I went out. And I was just like, is that going to happen every time? And they're like, I don't know, it depends. Are you a ghost magnet? Which is the first time I ever heard the term ghost magnet. And I said, I have no idea, because I don't know what that means. We had a wonderful evening. It was a great investigation. We was certainly one of the best and most beautiful investigations, because we were out at night in the middle of the countryside in Pennsylvania with fireflies everywhere. And
Oh.
course, there was supposed to be a black bear in the area, so everyone's freaking out and afraid that a bear was going to come into our campsite. It was an experience. And I didn't have any more experiences that night, though other people did. And we did capture some EVPs, and there were a few things that happened. But at the time, all I could think of was, I'm a total novice, but for some reason, whatever happened, happened. The most interesting part happened to me. And I felt like that was a real welcome from the paranormal world to sort of say, hey, you're in the right place. We intend to interact with you. I used to say about doing social anthropology, I'm a social anthropologist, that we're not the archaeologists. The archaeologists work with the dead, and we work with the living. But now I can't really make that claim anymore, because sometimes I work with the dead when I'm dealing with the paranormal.
Well, that's really a really cool story because some, investigators and different people who are interested in the paranormal, some of them haven't even had an experience like that. Now, why do you think that the scientific community isn't embracing the paranormal world as much? Do you think it's because of some of the hoaxes through history, the TV shows, some of them that maybe are questionable? Sometimes things are done for ratings or.
Doesn't it have something to do with the very idea of the anomaly, right? That almost all the data that's collected by paranormal researchers those data are anomalous data, which is to say they're one-offs, or there's something that you can't force into replicability. You can't make it replicate. And one of the tenets of scientific experimentation is that you can replicate your results. So as you know, since you've talked to a lot of people who are paranormal researchers, and maybe a paranormal researcher yourself, I didn't ask you whether you were or not. One of the problems is you can go to the same haunted location and you can have completely different experiences there from one time to the other. Over time, when you capture a lot of stories and you talk to a lot of people who've gone to various places, there are particular spots that people will go to because they figure that's where they're going to have an experience, or there are particular kinds of experiences that they might expect in certain places. But you can't be sure that when you go there, that's going to happen for you. In fact, like you said, you could be the most willing paranormal researcher in the world and never have an experience. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about the kinds of experiences they've had. And almost nobody that I've talked to, of course, has had the holy grail experience of a full-bodied apparition. They haven't seen anything like that. They may have captured photographic evidence, or they may have captured EVPs, or they may have captured various kinds of vibrations in different places, but they haven't. They can't go back to the same spot and expect to have the same experience ever. For the scientific community, if you can't do that replicability, if you can't make it replicate, then it's always going to be anomalous data. And anomalous data isn't going to be treated the same as replicable data. I mean, in the end, I think that's the hardcore, hard science response to this, which is, if it were true, it should be true consistently. Of course, I'm a social scientist, right? And we deal with human beings. And because of that, we know for a fact that a lot of stuff's anomalous.
Right.
People are going to be, similar in their responses to things, but you're never going to peg it and say, okay, I can predict exactly what is going to happen in this election. I can predict exactly how people are going to react to this kind of economic crisis. I can predict exactly how people will react to, say, the pandemic. If you're doing work with people, you can't expect the same kind of regularity that my natural science friends expect from their investigations into the natural world. They really do think they're going to find a set of replicable and steady kinds of responses from the world around them. And when they don't, then they have to figure out why is it so anomalous. But paranormal research, by definition, kind of prides itself on the anomaly, right?
Right.
The anomaly is where it's at. And that is not the model of what's called normal science.
That makes sense because of the replication. I mean, that, and then I guess when you're trained as a scientist in that field, that's what you go by, and that's what you're used to, and the proof, and I do get that. Now, speaking of hoaxes, and I'm going to tie this all in, is that you have been to Lillydale, New York, the Mecca,
I,
the epicenter. For those of you who do not know Lilydale, New York, that is where it's like psychic spiritualism, mediumship. They have it day and night. I mean, there's like maybe 200 to 300 people that live there,
mhm.
and people ascend there and take classes, and they have like James Van Prague and different people to do classes and speak, and the Fox sisters comes to mind.
Well, they have the house
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
Lilydale.
Mhm.
They moved the Fox sisters' house to Lilydale in the 19th century, the late 19th century, I believe. Could have been the early 20th, but I think it was the late 19th. They actually moved the Fox sisters' house to Lilydale. So when you go to Lilydale, you can go to a museum and you can see all this sort of material from the spiritualist movement of the 19th and early 20th century. And you can see the Fox sisters' house because they were so impressed by the whole concept of it that they actually moved it there. And spiritualism was arguably the most important new religious movement of the 19th century. There were spiritualists in America all over, everywhere from the 1840s forward. So we're looking at a major religious movement that today is only there are vestiges of it left, right? And Lilydale is one of those vestiges. Lilydale is a summer camp for spiritualists. It's where spiritualists go in the summertime for their vacation. And they have cottages that they mostly you have to buy a cottage in Lilydale. You actually have to have been in a spiritualist church for a certain period of time. You can't just decide, I'm going to go buy some real estate in Lilydale and live there. You have to make a commitment to the religion. So most of the people in Lilydale who aren't there as tourists, most of the people who live there are spiritualists. So that means some of them are psychic mediums and some are not practicing or professional psychic mediums. But if you go as a professional, there's a very particular sort of trajectory you have to get on. Not just anybody can hang their shingle up by their cottage in
Right.
Lilydale and say, okay, I'm going to do readings for you. You have to actually go in front of a board, the Lilydale, sort of spiritualist board, and you have to prove that you're good at what you do. You have to, not bring disrepute upon the mediumship that's going on. You have to show you're a serious medium and you're not just in it for the cash. If you want to go and do readings in Lilydale, even that you have to be vetted. So there are various free reading events every day in Lilydale in the summertime. And different mediums come from all over the US and from Canada and also from Mexico, from Europe, to come to Lilydale to do readings for people in the great public spaces. But to do that, you have to kind of go through the board again. So there's a board of regular mediums who are reputable and who are understood to have excellent gifts, and they vet you. So when you go to Lilydale, which anybody can, you can go and buy a sort of day ticket and hang out in Lilydale all day and go to various message ceremonies. You can also go to various lectures. There's all kinds of stuff you can do in Lilydale. But once you get there, you're you're within a sacred space. It is a summer camp, but it's a churchy summer camp. The spiritualists are the church.
Now, when I was researching on Lillydale, and the Fox sisters, and they're the ones that really are credited with kind of starting the spiritualist movement in a way, and then one of them, it was Maggie, and, they would say, ask questions and it would be popping and cracking and then years later, I think it was Maggie that said, "Oh, that was not real. It was a hoax," and
It was
all
our
that.
toes.
Right, it was our toes and our joints
Right.
popping, and
Hmm.
as the older I get, I can see where they're coming from.
Or your knee. You can
Right,
imagine
right.
your
I
knee
could I
being
could do
able to
that,
do it.
but
But these were young girls,
right,
these were not
right.
arthritic old women.
Right. And so, but then she recanted, and then I read that, that they were kind of destitute there towards the end, and that they needed the money, and somebody had paid them like $1,500, which back in the day, that was a lot of money, and, to help them out. And, no, it was a hoax. And then they recanted it like a year or so later.
I think that spiritualism and the Fox sisters, and not just the Fox sisters, but a lot of other people, the first woman candidate for president in the United States was a spiritualist, Woodhull, for Victoria Woodhull, or it's Victoria, right? They were radicals of their time. The Fox sisters didn't start out being radicals. They started out being young teenage girls, started communicating with something at their house, which later, people decided it was a murder victim that they were talking to, a peddler who had been supposedly murdered and buried in the basement. They didn't know what they were talking to. They just thought they were having kind of a laugh. They were having fun. It took off. Sometimes things just get out of hand. And their fame really got out of hand. They got put up in front of huge crowds of people paid to come and see them, to ask questions and to have them engage in the rapping and the crackling and all of those kinds of noise making things. They were supposed to be answering questions. What happened later was that, building on this original, two young girls who happened to become super famous because of their capacity to communicate with spirits or to rap with their knuckles or whatever is happening here, right? It developed a whole theology, and it became part of the radical or progressive movement in the United States, in the second half of the 19th century, which was tied up with abolitionist movement, was tied up with women's rights movement. It was tied up with, it was not anti-Christian. I know some people seem to think it was anti-Christian, but it wasn't at all. These were extremely Christian folk, but who didn't think the standard theology of heaven and hell was applicable. They thought that what was going on was that there's some place that they called the Summerland. And in the Summerland, that's where all the dead go. And if you know how to access that, whether through mediumship or through tools and objects, you could somehow communicate and speak to, those who had gone before. And remember, this is around the time that the telegraph is becoming, ubiquitous. Is something you see everywhere in the US and other places. And people thought of this as a telegraph, a technology to the dead. So this whole connection that we have today with paranormal researchers, right, and technology, this is very old, actually. I've even argued that we can go all the way back to the Odyssey, and we can see Odysseus, sort of like pulling out his cauldron and, and putting the blood in it, as a kind of technology, a sacrifice technology, to draw the dead to him so that he can talk to them. There's always been a sense that the dead are somehow, in Western societies, and especially, that the dead are somehow just beyond our usual communication areas. And if we could find the right tool, because that's what technology is, right? It's a tool. If we could find the right tool or tools, then we could open that up. The Fox sisters, the tool was them. So those early mediums, those early psychic mediums, the tool was their body, was their capacity they could break through. But other people had, like horns that they supposedly could hear the dead through, and people had cartomancy, so they were using cards to bring the dead to them, or they were using automatic writing to make it possible. All of this was part of this sort of spiritualist tool chest. By the time we get to the end of the 19th century, it's not just mediums like the Fox sisters. It's mediums who are very specialized and who do very specialized things. And that's when you start getting all that, the stuff that really ticked Harry Houdini off,
Right.
The ectoplasm and whatnot,
Yeah.
that people began to think of spiritualists as frauds. But prior to the great debunking of the early 20th century, people weren't really looking at spiritualists as frauds. I mean, spiritualist photography was very powerful. When the telephone came into being, people started to tell stories about being able to speak to the dead on telephones, and we still hear that today. The dead are in our computers now. The dead are probably going to be an AI before you know it. Maybe
Right.
they're already there,
You
right?
never know.
And certainly we've got the whole idea of bringing, dead actors back to life and sticking them into the movies again. All of this is very much, I think, in line with the old spiritualists. The spiritualists really thought we could find a way, that there had to be a way to talk to those who had passed, because they didn't think they were gone. They just thought they were removed.
Well, you know what? I have enjoyed our conversation so much. I've really learned a lot. I've learned, even more than what I, had researched about Lillydale. And in closing, what would you say to maybe some paranormal researchers or those that are enthusiasts? What would any kind of advice or anything would you like to leave us with?
Well, I don't know, stick to your guns.
Right.
If you really do want to do this work, I have met some of the kindest and nicest people in the paranormal community. I've met people who are just genuine seekers after knowledge. I felt very connected to people that I met. And I remember one time thinking, if I hadn't, gone to university, if I hadn't gone all the way and gotten a PhD, and I had stayed home in Tennessee, where I'm from, I'd probably be a paranormal researcher, because something about it appealed to me, and it still appeals to me. And that thing is the thing that I've always tried to understand in my interest in religious practice in general, which is, how do we communicate with transcendent beings, right?
Right.
Because isn't that what the dead are to us in many ways? Transcendent beings. They have transcended the body, and where are they now? And what are they doing? I think that's one of the big questions, So I'm saying to my paranormal research community friends, yeah, you're asking important questions, and the way you're asking them may not always suit the normal science community, but I don't think that means you should stop.
Right.
Why not?
Right. Why not? I like that. Why not? I know that you're busy, very busy, but thank you so much for taking time to talk with me tonight and being on the show. And I hope you'll join us again. Best wishes to you and happy hunting.
Happy hunting to you too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good night.